Welcome to another episode of the Bleeding Edge of Digital Health. Really excited about today's guest, Vasu Nadella, co-founder and CEO of Vital Bio. Vasu, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well, Mike. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Appreciate you agreeing to come on the show and was really excited about spotlighting this technology for the audience. This is what you guys are building is really incredible. Um, it's in terms of the tech, I guess the best way to say what you guys are trying to accomplish is reinventing lab testing to enable radical access to care. But it's definitely much more than that. I'm looking forward to getting into that in the show. Way I like to usually kind of kick things off is just have you kind of tell the origin story. How did this come about? How did you decide to create this company? What was the genesis of that?
Yeah, for sure. So, look, mission, vision, sense of purpose of why we exist as a company is really rooted in this frustration that we've been stuck in the mud on how care delivery and care model innovation's been going. Right. I think whether you're talking about the billions of dollars that are being invested in putting clinics into every pharmacy, nurses into every home, or even like invent things like AI doctor in your pocket, none of it is going to have the impact it can and should have if we're still stuck in the current physical infrastructure of diagnostics. Right. And so as we thought about the future and we thought about how care is still so tightly coupled to the number of physicians that are out there asking patients to show up somewhere physically, we realized that we have to move all these kind of tools that create a healthcare system that's really physically delimited today into everywhere patients are. And if we can do that, we can push care a lot closer and make it a lot more accessible and empowering and ultimately, a lot more proactive.
Was there an event that happened for you, or was there like an experience you had where you thought, man, this just needs to be cleaner, this needs to be better?
Yeah, I think a lot of the people on our founding team and at our company in general, have lived experiences around healthcare, right? And I think, for me, I had a lot of chronic disease in the family, a lot of doctors in the family. And I think we've all had this experience of seeing a loved one go through something and have to watch them kind of live with a bit of unknown for a little too long and frankly be a little disempowered for a little too long. I think the access to information that lab testing ultimately provides and ultimately creates this cascade that enables things like care delivery and diagnosis and treatment to happen means that you're kind of stuck in this world where if you don't have the diagnosis part, you're never really going to see the rest of it happen as quickly
Right.
and as liquidly as it should. I think when we thought about the bigger opportunities in care, I think there's people approaching this from all different sides, right? Everyone ultimately wants care to be more accessible, for there to be less admin overhead, ultimately people to live happier and healthier lives. Our approach is really in understanding why this hadn't happened yet. You know, people all clearly believe in the future of lab testing not being, further away from the patient, but being closer to the patient. And we realized there was a sort of central problem where the product spec to enable it was super, super hard. But if you could make it happen, you'd open up all these other possibilities, right? And how care could get delivered. And that product spec isn't a complicated one. You have to be comprehensive. You have to have fast turnaround. You have to be inexpensive, right? You have to make sense from an economics perspective. And ultimately, all of this like really hardcore technology has to be wrapped in a user experience that's super easy to use, really hard to return an erroneous result, and ultimately fit into workflow as it exists today. And so, I think that's what we pursued when we realized the opportunity was so large.
Yeah, yeah. It's boy, is it. I mean, you don't understand how broken the system is until you're inside of it, right? I mean,
Yeah,
my parents are getting up in age, and we're starting to have to manage their care, and my brother and I don't live in the city they live in, and it's that's challenging, but it even rings more true when you have a personal experience. I think I was telling you the last time we talked,
yeah,
I had a routine iron panel that was ordered by my physician. I went down to Quest or LabCorp, but it doesn't matter, they're all the same. And it takes you forever to get an appointment. You get there, they don't have the orders in the system. They send you
yeah,
home. You call your doc, they resend the orders. I got there a second time, and the labs still weren't in the system. Thankfully, I had them fax them over to me, which I had in email, and I could show them to them. And then you get the test, and your doctor doesn't call you. You have no clue what the results were.
Yeah.
I called my doctor. They said, we never got it. We never got the results. I called Quest, I think it was. They couldn't find me in the system. And
Yeah.
then, 45 minutes later, you're on the phone with them. They find you in the system, and you finally get the results. They email them to you. You don't know how to interpret them. So then you've got to send them to the doctor. And then the doctor,
Totally.
good
Yeah.
luck getting an appointment with your doctor to find out. It's just broken. It is so
Yeah.
broken. And uh, so that kind of leads me that, I'd love to just hear, what's the specific use case you guys are trying to solve? Is it
Yeah.
just it can't be as simple as just getting labs done quicker, because that doesn't solve workflow problems, that doesn't
Totally.
solve patient experience, et cetera. I'd love for
Yeah.
you to kind of delve into, without jumping into the tech too much, because we'll get into that next.
Yeah.
But what's the use case you're really, you guys, like, if you guys, when you started this, if you said we could just solve this problem?
Yeah. Maybe my quick reaction to your story, and I'll get into the use case. It We spent a bunch of time before we really even started Vital, before we went down the sort of rabbit hole of figuring how to make the tech work, spending time with physicians, watching workflows, everything from like super high end, everything's marble concierge medicine, to like some clinics where there's security guards, you have to get buzzed in just to get into the building.
Yeah.
And I think in all of these, you quickly realize how much physicians in particular are kind of holding it all together with duct tape, right? It is so disjoint. The clinical teams that are approaching this problem are stuck with the tools that they have. And so when we think about care delivery, all the things are broken, exactly your experience that you described, how disjoint it was. It's like duct tape around the whole thing just to keep it all together and make sure, the most at-risk patients don't slip through. And of course, there's friction. Of course, that friction leads to low adherence and worse outcomes and all these other things. Because any system that's this complex that has these points of friction or gaps in capacity turns into a broken system. Like it's obviously going to leave people behind. So I just want to say, like, I think I hear a story like that, an experience like that all the time, especially as it relates to lab testing and then like the cascade that doesn't happen afterwards.
Yeah,
Um,
because the problem with that is, and sorry to interrupt, but
yeah,
the problem with that is very few people are knowledgeable as we are in this industry to be able
yeah,
um, to know who to call, to be able to
totally.
follow that diagram, to be able to get what you're ultimately looking for. And not many people are super empowered around their healthcare anyways, right?
Yeah,
It's scary for a lot of people, and so they're like, less information is better. I don't want to be, I don't
all
want
of
the
the human elements
information.
are
And so
destroyed.
they just slip through the cracks, to your point. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's definitely an issue.
I think even your point about your parents, I think rings super true, right? Like the generalized case here is you have a 65-year-old that's been, goes to the physician for their annual wellness appointment because they got reminded to do that. And then they're asked to go to a lab corp, right? Maybe they took a bus to get there, take another bus to a lab corp, right? They're getting their blood drawn, and then they have to come back for the in-person encounter to get educated, to drive the, closing those gaps in documentation and care that lead to all the other stuff. The stats around like the amount of chronic disease that's underdiagnosed is insane. The CDC's got data on this. It's like, I think like it was like 2/3 of pre-diabetics don't know they're pre-diabetic. And like it is like terrifying. And
Yep.
coming to your point about like, hey, what's this like real use case, or what's the kind of problem set that we're really dealing with? I think what we were struck by is, we can imagine this future, like AI doctor in your pocket. There's all these things you can do when you've got these tools next to you, all these new forms of care delivery. We're excited about that. We want to enable that. Those are things that are fundamentally like part of the vision. But just in the short term, we are talking about everyday people who today have to take a day off of work, right, to go see the physician, take another day or take more time away from their family and work to go get their labs done. All of that is just a really disjoint, broken thing. And all we're really trying to do with the first product that we're building, right? Vital is broadly trying to build an ecosystem of products and services all around the sort of problem sets that you're talking about. But the first product, the Vital One, is really about enabling what we call real-time medicine in every primary care practice. And so there's a set of tests that we're going to do, but really it's like fitting into workflow in a way that transforms care into this thing that requires multiple visits, multiple steps, follow up, right? Either really shallow follow up or no follow up at all, and
Yep.
turns it into a hyper productive visit where physicians can move through that treatment, diagnosis, and ultimately payment workflow in a single visit and close those gaps in care and documentation. It just so happens that the gap that we see is in lab testing, and that's why we built this device. But all of it is oriented around that end state of making it easy to use and enabling all these things to drive to that real-time medicine concept.
Yeah. No, I mean, you make it sound like a small focus, but it's a big issue, and it's a challenging one to figure out. Many have tried,
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
but
Well,
it's
let's talk about that. I think the many have tried, right? I think there's been so many people who've tried to solve this problem.
yeah,
I I think we have an amazing team, but I don't think anyone on this team has the hubris to think that we're so much smarter than anyone else who's tried this. So, maybe as a segue into tech, I can tell you how we came up with the approach we came up with. I think the things that we did a little bit differently than other people have done in the past.
I love that. Yeah, it's a great segue.
Really it boils down to two core concepts. One is this broad kind of notion that we realized early on as we studied all these people who had failed in the past that they tended to just start with like a hammer, right? They spun out of a particular lab or they invented one piece of technology and then they hunted for the nail to hit it with. And I think from the very beginning, we realized, hey, if you want to go after this problem set, you have to think very differently. And a lot of it is the strategic and cultural and kind of organizational design that lets you accelerate to a useful and full menu fast enough. And so part of that is like this breakthrough I think we had early on where we realized we have to make it so the N+1 test that we develop is easier than the first one, right? If we're never, otherwise we'll never converge on a time scale that makes sense, both from like a venture perspective, but also from just like hey, you have to get to a useful menu quickly here
Right.
point of view. And so like I think the way we structured our team, the way we thought about even like the first like 3 or 4 years of our company were really built around, hey, we need to design platforms. And those platforms, one day we can put them together, right? System of systems, combine these modules to quickly accelerate into this world where we have a comprehensive menu. And I think it's one of the things I'm really excited about with the team. Like it's a bet we took as a team. There were many moments we had to like completely throw out what we had because we realized it just wasn't converging fast enough, or we didn't have a platform yet. And then I think the bets have paid off in the last like year and a half as we start put these pieces together, and the acceleration towards the final product is really ramped up. The second piece is I think is something that you've probably seen with a lot of these companies. Like they launch and they get something, or like they announce that they have something. But then there's like this period where like nothing happens, right? They kind of go into zombie mode or just kind of disappear. And I think a lot of that comes down to it's actually like not the hardest thing to get to like a core concept that works in the lab, right? I think there's a lot of ways to kind of get to that point. But I think the other thing we realized really early on is you gotta be really, really intentional about where you place complexity in the system, how you design the system and architect the system so it's actually reliable, actually productizable, actually manufacturable. And I think there was another set of things where we were like, cool, we got to this point. We hit this sort of what we call an invisible asymptote. Like what we thought was going to happen on paper did not pan out. This is just not reliable, or this fails too frequently. We got to start over and take a different approach. Kind of walk backwards 10 times to like kind of go back down the other fork in the road. And so I think those are the two things that we were really, one, we're really not afraid to like throw things out and really drive before we even built anything to be really, really specific on how we want to approach the architecture. And the other was like thinking in platforms. I think those are the two things that we just got right in terms of setting the problem up the right way. And then, yeah, we got an amazing team. They just threw everything they had at it. And I think that's what's gotten us to this point.
That's great. What uh, maybe while you're pulling up the screen share there, because I know we were gonna you got a couple
Yeah.
videos you were gonna show to kind of walk us through the tech. Who designed the product? This is for those of you out there listening that have not seen this product. I think my initial LinkedIn message to you, Vasu, was
Yeah.
this is the most elegant product I think I've ever seen in medtech. I mean, this looks like something that came out of Apple.
Oh, that's so kind of you to say. Yeah, we worked with this amazing team at Branch. They'll be really delighted to hear you say that. Um, yeah, they're an awesome team, and we've worked with them now for upwards of like almost 3 to 4 years. The prompts we gave them are actually interesting where we didn't want it to look like a medical device, right? And I think beyond that, they had seen the broader vision and the broader ecosystem that we've had in mind to develop. So it was like, not only do we want this not feel and look like a medical device, but like at the end of the day, like we have this like vision for other products that they've integrated and they've thought about from the very beginning. And with that, I think they were able to think through how do you take like a design language, have it translate to future products that are not going to be things that sit in a doctor's office, but maybe sit in the home or are just much more consumer oriented, and hopefully can redefine or be part of how we redefine our relationship to healthcare and care delivery.
Yeah, I mean, you succeeded because it does. It looks like a consumer product, and
Awesome.
and that's a neat concept to follow. Where you're not just building this product, but you're when building this product, keeping in mind the entire product roadmap and the fact that it's going to, several products down range are going to be targeted to a different customer base, and to be
Oh,
able to
totally.
tie that all in, that's not an easy ask.
Yeah, no, the team, it's a thing that we get pushback on all the time too, because it's always easier just to plunge forward with kind of tunnel vision on the one thing.
Yeah,
It's really hard to have this sort of unbounded thinking that I think leads to generational, highly impactful companies. The other piece I think we realize is like if it looks like a medical device and it acts like a medical device, it's not going to be inviting. It's not going to be easy to use. People have to want to use it. And then beyond that, the whole concept here is this thing is incredibly easy for people to adopt, fit into workflow, get trained on. And if it looks really complex, like a traditional lab instrument where there's all these like levers and things, drawers to pull out and consumables to use, it's just not realistic that even if we get over the hump of getting people to adopt it, that it's actually going to get used frequently enough. Clinical teams are excited to use it. It's like a delightful experience day to day in the middle of all the stuff that they're doing. So yeah, it was a focus of the team from the very
yeah,
beginning.
it's got to be inviting. It has to be inviting. So why don't you tell us a little bit more about kind of specific advantages to this technology, and what diagnostics you're targeting now versus diagnostics you guys are looking at downrange.
Yeah, for sure. So this is, going back to like an earlier comment, I think that you and I were talking about the product spec for this is actually really simple. It's just an incredibly high bar. You have to make this super easy to use. You have to be comprehensive from a menu perspective, has to have fast turnaround, all while, wrapped in this user interface that's simple to adapt into workflows. From a test menu perspective, it turns out there's actually three core types of tests that are used today in primary care. So it's things like hematology, clinical chemistry, and immunoassay. In
Mm-hmm.
fact, we've also got plans to integrate urine analysis in the future, and we've got the ability to readily do that within the same system. Now, it all starts with user experience. So let me walk you through how that works. Bidirectional connectivity to EMR systems makes it so you can just tap the patient that you're looking for. You can drop in either vacutainers or microtainers. And you'll notice these vacutainers go in capped. So it's one of the main things we heard early on.
Yeah.
Everything here is really built around pain points from physicians. They didn't want their staff exposed to blood. So great, go in capped. The consumables are, as you can see, are stored next to the instrument totally at room temperature. They're compact. You can store them many, many times over. And then finally, it's a walk away system. So less than 30 seconds of hands on time. And then you're able to walk away without worrying about what's going on within the system. There's a ton of QC built into each consumable, into the overhead cameras that are watching every single critical operation within the system. All of that is to reduce all that risk of erroneous error and make sure that we're able to correctly operate everything and return high quality lab results.
Wow.
Yes, yeah, you asked about menus. So like really we're thinking about how to be comprehensive here. You may recognize a lot of these tests from your, last physical or something like that. It's like a
Yep.
5-part differential, a full comprehensive metabolic panel, including things like electrolytes. And a lot of the same methodologies and systems that we're using here are designed to mimic and match sort of the performance of current gold standard. So not like older school point of care instruments that maybe use older methods from a chemistry perspective or detection perspective. We're using the latest and greatest, and we're trying to meet the performance of the latest and greatest. And then finally, we have a large menu of immunoassays. And so like typically from a menu perspective, the way this goes is like everyone kind of needs the core hematology and clinical chemistry tests. It's kind of like the weather network, I like to say, in like a TV bundle. And then everyone likes, needs two or three different immunoassays depending on what diseases they're managing, family histories, and generally like stage of life. So when we think about future menus, this menu is really designed around an annual wellness visit. And in particular, we think a lot about value-based care as our first market. Um, but beyond that, it's really easy for us from a design perspective, and I'll show you how to swap out immunoassays for things like a fertility panel or a male wellness panel, or even like a pediatrics panel. And you can still take the core, 90% of this menu that is designed for everybody and design these follow-on menus that are for specific populations to close gaps in care that might exist there, or even move towards like a more of a wellness opportunity. So that's core menu that we're building. In that disc pack you saw, the way it's designed is actually around 3 discs. And so each disc does a different type of test. And within each of those discs are these little freeze-dried lyo beads. So that's how we can get to room temperature stability. And everything we're doing here is designed for high volume, low cost manufacturing. So single piece of injection molded plastic, freeze-dried lyo beads, and basically a clear piece of tape on top. So you can kind of see how these things are easy to automate the assembly of. And in fact, you can store them all separately kind of indefinitely and then bring them together when you want to kick off that process. So Mike, everyone's always wondering how it works. We're an incredibly transparent company, so excited to show you. Just to warrant you, you're going to see the drawer come in on the left side, and then I'll walk you through everything that's happening. So drawer comes in, you'll actually see that we mix the tubes inside the system, and we place each of the discs into the subsystems, their respective subsystems. While we're doing that, the tubes actually go back to get uncapped, and they actually come back out when the system's all done recap. So you've got all that sample still left over for any reflex testing or downstream testing you want to do. And then what you're going to see is we basically take a little bit of buffer and blood and place it into each of the subsystems, into the center of each of these discs. And then they start spinning, just like that bottom right one there. Now, each of these discs have different microfluidic structures on them. They share a lot of the same kind of core concepts and core components, but very different types of assays, right? You've got clinical chemistry, where you're measuring an enzyme, versus hematology, where you're counting the different kinds of blood cells, versus immunoassays, where you're measuring a hormone, for example, with an antibody. You'll see here that the robotics are actually driving a lot of the initial steps, but everything's running in parallel afterwards on its own. And we did that very intentionally. We realized like robotics never work the way you want them to, year 5, day 20, as they did on day 1. So we baked a lot of that complexity, and very intentionally so, baked a lot of that complexity that drives precision and accuracy into each of those microfluidic discs. And it turns out as a civilization, we're really good at injection molding plastic consistently.
Yeah.
And so that's how we can guarantee that every test is going to work the same way. And the robotics here are actually just doing kind of gross steps, grossly over delivering blood, right? They're not trying to hit an accuracy and precision goal. All of that's happening on those discs. All that's being driven by is the centrifugal motion, the acceleration and deceleration of those discs from that central motor.
Is this the way you guys constructed the mechanism of actually the discs and the centrifusion of the blood? Is that different than from a traditional lab device, or did you guys take apart a lab device, kind of learn how that worked, and then just take it and make it better?
Yeah, it's super different than how the large central labs work. And I think it's actually very much a like start from the whiteboard up and think through all the different components. And so we studied other companies, and there are a few other companies out there that went after centrifugal microfluidics. I think what we've done is pack like a way higher, 2 to 3x density of assays on the same disk. So that took, reinventing, thinking about this stuff again from first principles. But you'll find that like, for each of these different kinds of tests, it's actually a different blend of complexity. So for immunoassays, we have really novel, ton of IP on the biochemistry side, really complex microfluidic, pretty insane hardware that's going on there. But the readout's actually super simple. It's just a fluorescence readout like a traditional immunoassay. Whereas on the hematology side, really novel, complex optics that takes advantage of all the breakthroughs in consumer electronics. So like consumer electronic, cell phone camera lenses, for example. And we combine that with novel computer vision techniques and just a different approach there that lets us make the microfluidic actually relatively simple, and that it's not driving a ton of crazy fluidic functions, just
Yeah.
mixing and then creating a simple monolayer. But you have to do all of that with really tight accuracy and precision. So yeah, I think a lot of this is just like rethinking the whole problem.
Which is usually the process by which great products are created.
Yeah, yeah, I think you have to, right? And I think the more we've seen this in other companies too, like they try to take a little bit off the shelf, do a little bit in-house, and you end up with this kind of hodgepodge that ultimately it doesn't meet any of those core
You have to.
critical product specs.
That's an incredible technology. Tell us, Vasu, where are you guys at from a regulatory perspective? What
Yeah.
when could we realistically see this hit the market?
Yeah. So even before that, we've produced a ton of data on over 5,500 patient samples. All of our data is on our website, so vitalbio.com/data. A lot of the samples come from partners like LabCorp, come from local hospital labs that we get to work with, who are awesome kind of innovation partners in helping us push our ability to test extreme samples, patient samples from sick patients, as well as make sure that our stuff is meeting the gold standard performance today. Of course, we're not cleared yet. Everything here has not been reviewed by the FDA. We've done our first pre-sub with the FDA and spent some time with them, planning on having more conversations with them. They've been actually incredibly supportive, and so really clear what we have to get done. Everything you're seeing is starts with a 510(k), so really standard, showing that we're substantially equivalent to existing devices out there. And that menu is a really standard menu. So there's tons and tons of predicate devices that we get to tap into, look at how they cleared their device and demonstrated substantial equivalence to the FDA. And then from there, we'll work on a CLIA waiver. And the CLIA waiver study is also relatively simple and straightforward. So our FDA process, we're going to kick that off later this year. We hope to get to market towards the end of 25 and hopefully have this in people's hands by then.
I love it. I love it. Uh, obviously primary care physicians would be an obvious target for this.
Yeah.
Who else would you be targeting? I would think you mentioned Quest and LabCorp. I would think they would be a natural partner for this if they could run tests on this in their offices and deliver results, with a patient waiting, in the lobby 5 minutes. That's just going to enhance the service that they're providing. Who
Totally.
else would be the target market for this? Would they be considered, a candidate as a target, and who else?
Yeah, LabCorp's a small investor in the company, and they've been amazing partners to us. Again, like they send us thousands of samples. We get access to some amazing experts. And Marsha Eisenberg, Dr. Marsha Eisenberg, the chief science officer of LabCorp, sits on our board and has been this like amazing mentor and guide for us for the last 4 years. So they've been an amazing partner and totally excited to work with them on distribution and getting this in front of people. No one is as good at selling, lab testing to primary care, some of these large central labs, given their experience doing it. And so I think, they make a ton of sense. When we start thinking beyond, typical PCPs and working with other lab distribution partners, we get really excited when we hear about these problems, especially around access. And so a great example of this recently was we had a bunch of skilled nursing folks reach out to us, and they described a problem where it's actually incredibly hard to get a phlebotomist in to draw
Yeah.
blood frequently at a skilled nursing facility. And then beyond that, the payment models and like the evolution of that space is shifting pretty quickly into one where, you know, typically the decision is, hey, can I get a lab test? Is it urgent? And if it's that urgent, should I just escalate to a higher level of acuity of care, whether that's an ER or some other sort of
Urgent,
facility,
whatever.
right? Secondary, tertiary, care. And so the that kind of decision is like a very expensive one for the healthcare system. And if you could bring tools like this to every site of care and combine that with, virtual care options that exist today, you get a much more powerful kind of just design space, as we like to call it, for delivering care.
Yep.
And I think those are sort of the things that we are excited to push, whether it's pharmacy, skilled nursing, all these alternative sites of care that where primary care actually does happen, on a daily basis, can just become much more powerful, pushing it further into the community, further closer to patients. All of that is like I think going to be incredibly powerful stuff that we're excited to tap into.
Yeah, it's great. What I want to be sensitive to time here, but I guess last question I would always like to ask, because I know you guys have had a ton of success. What's like the one thing that keeps you up at night right now? What's the biggest challenge moving forward? What's the one thing that that probably ties up most of your brain space at this point in terms of the hurdle you guys have to get past? Obviously, there's the regulatory hurdle, but is there anything that
Yeah.
you're really trying to work through?
I think there's always like the linear risk things that come down to execution, having a really strong program management function within the company, hitting core dates. I think the nature of any company that combines hardware, software, chemistry, hardcore optics, these timelines are so interdependent, interwoven that you just have to nail each of them, or you turn into like this domino effect where it gets really painful. I'm really happy that we're kind of over the hump on a lot of the technical risk at this point, and we're hitting our timeline. The team is just cranking and humming along, and we're building better processes as we scale up as well. So there's always like that, some large percent of my brain that's like worried about that, thinking about that. But I have an amazing team. They're running hard at this stuff. The the piece that I actually think a lot more about is how do you kind of keep the team focused, but still maintain a level of unbounded thinking about the future products to build and ways to take the company and ultimately like reverse engineer a company that can make every kind of core function that's going to make it more expansive a competitive advantage, right? So
Mhm.
whether it's like, hey, if we have an amazing clinical function, it's not just about getting the vital one through its clinical studies quickly, but it's about how do we create an engine that lets us pump out more
Right.
assays and expand the menu quickly, right? Or same thing for regulatory, for engineering, and for chemistry and microfluidics. Like, what are the design decisions that we're making today that are either going to close doors or open doors to accelerate our future vision to come forward? And that's where I spend a lot of, I think, my brain power, shower thoughts, just thinking about how to set the problem up the right way. And then, yeah, driving the team to still focus, but, keep the vision in mind and in check.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it was Peter Thiel in Zero to One that said, once you get to that threshold, and I can't remember the number. Um, I want to say it was 150 people, but once you get to that threshold where, you become a legitimate company, it becomes very hard to scale and innovate. Those two
Yeah,
things, they're really
yeah,
challenging. And it's funny because I try to ask that question if we have time with every guest, and it's
yeah,
I'd say at more than 50% of the time, that is the one challenge that everybody's always thinking about is how do you stay focused on what the now and making sure that we're successful with that, but
yeah,
how do we continue to innovate and build new technologies that will or create new technologies that will be the future of the company.
yeah.
So it doesn't surprise me to hear that. I want to get you out of here on time. Really appreciate you coming on the show today. This is going to be probably, no doubt, one of the most exciting technologies that I've published so far. The audience is going to love this. So really appreciate you taking the time to come on, and hope we can stay in touch and maybe get you back on for a follow-up episode once you guys get approval and are off and running with commercialization.
That's amazing. Mike, such a pleasure. Thanks for the great questions and thanks for having me.
You got it. That's it for this edition of the Bleeding Edge of Digital Health. We will catch you guys on the next episode. Thanks.